Um, Got it. My name's Karen Williams. I am the co-chair of the Portland Utility Board, and I'll call this meeting to order. Under Portland City Code and state law, the Portland Utility Board is holding this meeting electronically. Board members and relevant city staff are attending remotely or by phone, and the city has made it available for the public to listen to the audio broadcast. The meeting is being recorded. The public will have an opportunity to provide comments and also on the agenda, and also can provide written testimony to the board by emailing utilityboard@portlandoregon.gov. PUB believes and acts on anti-racist principles. In our meeting spaces and interactions, while every person has the right to share their personal perspective, we stand against wrongful conduct, and particularly conduct that is targeted toward people that are made vulnerable by systemic inequities. So this means stepping up as a community when there is wrongful conduct and fostering a space of learning and growth for all of us. We speak up and speak out. Each person is empowered to maintain the culture of PUB, and we focus on the impacted individual or population, condemning the conduct, but not the person. Amy will walk us through our usual guidelines for meeting virtually.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Amy Archer Masters, and I'll walk through the guidelines really quickly. Please state your name before you speak, and if appropriate, the name of the person you're addressing or that you're addressing the group. The chat box is only viewable by the hosts, Eliza and myself, the PUB staff. So please limit any chats to technical and logistical issues, including signing up for public comment, asking for technical assistance, or reminding us if you've been waiting to speak and have not been called on. The raise hand function is primarily used by the board. The co-hosts may lower your hand once you've begun speaking, just to maintain the flow of the conversation. During public comment periods, the public can also raise their hand and you'll be called on when appropriate. If you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *9 to raise your hand. Videos may be turned on when you're speaking if desired. It's not required. Please mute your microphone when you're not speaking. Members of the public will be muted except when giving public comment. And if you're connecting by phone, you may need to press *6 to mute and unmute yourself. Public comment will be taken during the public comment period early in the meeting. Sign up through chat with PUB staff, or you can raise your hand during the public comment period. It's also available just prior to any formal board votes after a motion has been made and seconded by board members. As mentioned, the meeting is being recorded. I'll pass it back to you, Karen.
Thanks, Amy. And before we go through the agenda, I did want to say a special thank you to Robin Castro for facilitating the meeting a couple of weeks ago. A million thanks to you, Robin, for stepping up and helping out with that. So for today, after our usual public comment and review of the minutes of that meeting that Robin facilitated, we're going to spend about 20 minutes continuing and wrapping up for now the conversation that you all were having with Farshad, financial manager at BES, about PUB's role in the Bureau's big projects. So we'll spend about 20 minutes or so wrapping up that conversation. And then we are going to look at a couple of, we'll have some budget updates and look at a particular proposal really that I want to throw out to you all for how we will do things perhaps a little differently with this year's budget, reflecting some of the feedback that we've been hearing from you all about how you want to engage and provide meaningful feedback in the budget process. And then at about 4:30 or so, we need to have a short conversation about the co-chair vacancies and get interest expressed from people who would be interested in being a co-chair, because that names of folks need to go on the agenda for the December 15th meeting, at which time we'll make a joint decision, but we do need to have people express interest at this meeting. And that's it. Then we'll look ahead to that very meeting, December 15th meeting at a few minutes before 5, and then adjourn. So do we have any members who've had any communications with city officials that you would like to disclose? Tom Lipton.
This meeting is actually going to take place tomorrow. So I'm going to have a telephone conversation with Farshad. And Karen, you weren't at the last meeting, but he had volunteered to speak with anyone who wanted more information about the Tryon Creek project. So I will see what I can find out. I don't know if anybody else took him up on his offer, but after the conversation, I'll put some notes together and come back and report to the board about what he said, or what I can share, whatever he said, and then we can decide whether there's anything to do or not regarding the Tryon Creek project, and that's the treatment plant project. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I did see that in the minutes, and thanks, Farshad, for making yourself available for members' questions. Any other disclosures? Okay, very good. Let's go ahead and move on. Is there anyone wishing to make a public comment at this time?
Not received any via chat or in advance.
Okay, thank you. So then let's move on to take a quick look at our minutes from the 17th of November. Are there any corrections or additions or anything that's, corrections or additions? Tom, go ahead.
Yeah, so regarding the ramp project, toward the end of the conversation, it sounds like the people from Water Bureau and BES are asking us as a board to support them. So I wonder if we could consider putting that onto a future agenda item where we would talk about whether we want to make some kind of formal support letter or something like that regarding the program. There was a lot of really good discussion, a lot of important issues that came up, and perhaps we'd even want to talk about, well, I think we'd want to talk about that if we looked at deciding whether we want to give them some kind of formal support in the program or not. So so that was one item. And then the other item is kind of a typo, but I think it's important. They had mentioned that for the typical single family residential property, they would have to pay an extra $10.23 per year to support the program. And I'm just bringing that up because it doesn't say in the minutes per year. So I think it's important to put that kind of /year or annually or something like that, so that people reading the minutes, if anybody reads them, would see that that's not, they might mistake it and think it's $10.23 per month or something like that. So anyway, just putting that it's relative to the extra cost for other ratepayers per year, not per month. That's it.
Okay, the second one sounds like definitely an addition to your first point, Tom. Let's put a pin in that. That didn't sound like a correction to the minutes. That's just something you want to discuss when we look at future meeting topics. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like us to consider putting it on a future meeting. Yes.
Okay, let's come.
Whether we want to do that. Since they asked us, they basically asked us to do it. Or at least that's the way I read the minutes. So.
And Robin, just because you came on camera, do you have anything to add to the minutes? We're just getting to see you to say hi. That's great. Okay, fantastic. So with that addition, not really correction, but addition of per year, the minutes will stand as a documentation of the November 17th meeting. And so great. The next topic, Farshad, I understand you have 10 or so minutes of some context and sort of refresher to bring us back to where we left the conversation a couple weeks ago. Is that right?
That is right. I'm going to share my screen. And while I'm firing it up, I just want to acknowledge I was trying my best to incorporate some themes that you all have heard already as part of the asset management information that was shared back in. Are you all seeing that first slide?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And I don't think I did a great job of it. And really, this was in response to Lorraine, your really insightful question about working conditions at the plant and how is that incorporated in our big project conversations. And I wanted to take a couple minutes just to refresh people's memory about the asset management program that both bureaus are heavily involved in, and how that's an important framework for us planning for and executing our big projects. So I was stumbling around that last time, but I wanted just to make sure that I hit that point cleanly this time around. And then I'm here for any questions that you may have that we didn't get to last session. So you'll hopefully recognize some of these slides. I've added to them just to connect us to the topic at hand. But back in July, Shannon Axtell from BES walked through our asset management program information, and I wanted to share a couple of extracts from that slide deck. So in terms of how we manage assets, and particularly how we decide on the big capital projects that we fund and execute, they sit in this continuum of the connecting the outcomes that we're trying to achieve within our community and the services we provide. The assets sit in the middle of that continuum, and when we are thinking about what we need to do, what we need to invest in our asset portfolios, really we're talking about this middle section of this continuum. And I'm going to use a term that is maybe new to the conversation. There's a lot of focus on the budget, but I want to roll upstream a little bit to a concept called our investment strategy. And this is broken down into two sections. We have our long-term financial investment strategy dealing with our operating side of our business and our capital improvement plan side of our business. And those are both 5-year plans. And when we budget, we are just extracting what we're trying to achieve in any given year out of that 5-year plan. And that's a rolling 5-year plan. When year 1 drops or year 5 drops off, we introduce another year in the 5-year plan. So it's a continuous planning process. And I know that we've been focusing on the budget aspect of it, but I want you all to see kind of the bigger connection to what we're trying to achieve in our community, and how we plan for it is much more than just the budget. Another view of this is kind of the strategic line of sight perspective. And the assets and how we invest in our assets really start with our strategic plan and our equity plan, and go all the way down to how we manage individual assets, classes, and asset types. And we want to make sure that there is a line of sight between what we're investing in and ultimately what we're trying to achieve in our organization. And so the question of where is PUB's engagement in this process most productive? I think that was essentially the question from last time. And I said that ideally we would be focused on the strategic level, trying to clarify and influence and plan for how we show up in our community, what services we provide, the values that we want to support in our community. That's all set at the highest level. And as we work our way down through this process into the 7 portfolios of assets that BES manages, how we invest and budget for supporting those assets, and then ultimately seeing how those investments drive community outcomes. I think this is the second place that we would want PUB's engagement, and that is the feedback of here are the actual outcomes that we're achieving in the community, and here's what we thought we would achieve. And if we need to reconcile those two, and if there's a gap, that's an opportunity for us to refine our plans and perhaps even redirect our investments into different areas. I feel like that is, like I said, the most productive way to engage in the budget process and in big capital decisions. So for me, again, the takeaways, and this is a little bit of a repeat from last time, the investments that the Bureau makes, both in operations, but more on point for this topic in our big capital projects, is a lengthy and strategic planning process. When we're talking about capital, we're talking about a multi-year engineering and financial planning work. So it's most influential for us to influence those plans at the start, not prior to execution. And PUB's partnership in vision setting, I think, is really important if we can keep it at the strategic level and in the performance monitoring of that. I think that's an important part of the feedback loop that you all, I think, have a vested interest in. And I think those are the two areas that are, like I said, most important in terms of their influence. So really quick overview. I just wanted to make sure that I'm connecting this theme to the earlier question and presentations around asset management. And I know there were some questions we didn't get to last time. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have, either based off of last time or any of this new information. And I'm going to stop sharing unless there's some interest in seeing some slides, earlier slides.
Thank you, Farshad. Thanks. Appreciated that graphic with the 5-year operating plan and the fiscal years. That was helpful for me anyway, to understand how things fit together. So let's continue the conversation. Lorraine.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Farshad. I must say that it's the first time I've ever heard at the city mention of OPEX and CAPEX. Okay, it's I've worked in that space for a number of years when I was before I became an immigrant, and we always talk about operating budget and capital budget, right? Because the operation budget is driven by the capital budget, right? A lot of people do budgeting for capital projects, and then there's no money or no plan to maintain those capital projects. I'm glad to hear you talking OPEX, CAPEX. So I appreciate you sharing that you would like us to be at the highest level. But my question is, how and when does that happen, that we can be involved in it? And also at that level, how do our priorities get heard and implemented? Because you're saying that the next point that we're going to be looking at is the results, right? The outcomes. And I think that the gap between the mission, vision, and value stage, and then the outcomes is, by the time we get to that, things are set in stone, and then we realize that our priorities are not heard, weren't heard, or weren't implemented. So that is the kind of questions that I have.
Well, I was very careful not to actually use the labels OPEX or CAPEX because I didn't want to confuse anybody's, but I really appreciate your recognition of what those themes are. So I will answer your question that we're recognizing, and I'm going to go way out on a limb. We're recognizing that we have not been aligned. Our bureaus, I'll speak for BES, but I think our budgeting process it's a year-round process. And by the time PUB gets involved in that process, it is fairly set in stone. And so I think that, well, without a doubt, we would value PUB engagement earlier. I think that's the key. We don't want you to put a lot of effort into something that won't influence the outcomes. And when the outcomes are most influenced, gosh, I'm stumbling today, is much earlier in the process. So you guys are getting engaged, it's December. I'm thinking spring. That's how early we need to advance this conversation so that you can be a partner in the planning process and the visioning process. And then we can help track that through the budget development, through council presentations, and you can see all of that roll out rather than us trying to force misaligned timing together, in a meaningful way. I think that's the key. And I know that might be part of the conversation to come later today, so I don't want to steal any thunder, but I think that the punchline for me is meaningful partnership in the budgeting process has to happen earlier in the year.
Thank you.
So Lorraine, did you get what you needed on your second question about how our priorities get heard and implemented? Was that also in the context of sort of timing, or were you looking for something a little bit more specific?
Thanks, Karen. That is also one of the questions I have. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, so what that looks like, I think, is something that we would want to develop with you. I think that we have a process right now that is not firing on all cylinders, and I think that we would want to partner with you to design a process that works. And that process, again, has to happen earlier in the year, but I think we are open to co-developing what that engagement process looks like so that we can fold in PUB priorities into our planning. I don't have an answer for what that looks like, but I think that it's essential that we're both at the table for the development of that.
Question from Tom.
Thank you, Karen. Yeah, Farshad, I'm wondering maybe this offering a not too specific, but a general category of issue. So it's come to the attention of some people on the board that the BES watershed program has pretty much been changed dramatically from what it used to be before the reorganization, or if I call it that. Is that what you guys called it, the reorg? At any rate, when you changed everything. And so there's a lot of concern that many of the benefits of having that program are now, as far as anybody knows, are being lost or whatever. So how would we engage with BES in having a discussion about, and this is, of course, if the board even, if the majority of the board wanted to have these discussions, let's assume that they would, how would we go about doing that?
Well, first, I just want to maybe address and push back on the idea that because of the reorganization, the any one group has been diminished in their capability to deliver value. I think that there has been a lot of change coming out of we call it the transition. It's a lengthy strategic planning effort, and the transition in concept is a movement from an organization based on types of services that we're providing into functional areas. Moving to a functional area, functional organizational structure allows us to be more nimble and move resources to where they're needed as demanded by external or internal requirements. And that's a change. And as we all know, change is difficult. And but I don't think that we, from a financial perspective or from a capability perspective, we have made such a dramatic change as you're suggesting. I know that is an arguable point, but I think that that's something that we can definitely dig deeper into. Now, when would you guys have a window on that process or on that information and influence that process? I think it's, again, it can't happen in December. It has to happen earlier in the year. That would give us enough time to walk through the information that we have and your questions, and accommodate any of your priorities into our budgeting process.
Right. So could I offer this to go back to what you said earlier, looking at the outcomes. So perhaps it would be upon us to identify outcomes that perhaps are, let's just say, something to discuss, and then bring those to your attention. Of course, we do it within our own group first, so that we have that everybody on the board is on board with whatever it might be. But anyway, that sounds like the way we would do it, is identify outcomes that are not meeting what some members believe might need to be met, and then bring that to the Bureau's attention. And then you guys could figure out who would be involved and how we would go back. That big arrow that you had that takes us back, right? So that's the idea, is that we look at what we think isn't happening or is, and then we bring that back, and we can either bring it back in two ways. One is a positive way of saying great job, or you're missing the mark on this and that kind of thing. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I was thinking something along those lines, and it made me think of a question that I had asked a couple of years ago, I think, about where, like, assets like, say, watershed function or tree cover, or, how are those evaluated, tracked, measured? Where do they sort of show up in the in the asset program? And I think, Tom, what you alluded to there is maybe something we the pub can be looking at the outcomes, and the outcomes that we want to see or we think are important, and then giving feedback to BES if we think those outcomes are being met. But I think also having input early on in like the performance measures and the performance targets is another place maybe we can coordinate around a little bit more, so that we make sure that the things that we think are important are in fact being measured. So sorry, I took a little executive privilege there to just blurt something out. So how about Bob, last question, comment, and then we'll move on.
You're muted, Bob.
Sorry, thank you. I'm just following up on your comment and Tom's comment. I have tracked the BES watershed program really since its inception, served on, at least 10 budget committees to work on that and make sure that it was being funded adequately. And I think one of the challenges I've had for the last couple of years is that you can't find it anymore. Somebody that kind of knew that program inside and out, you can't find the people in the organization anymore as an external stakeholder. There's no longer a place to go. It's hard to find the projects because they're all kind of hidden and embedded. The outcomes seem to be diminishing. So I concur with Tom. I do think that the program is largely evaporating. That is somebody who tracked it for decades. And I think in the budget cycle, to kind of bring this point home, I used to be able to look at it and fairly easily discern what was moving and what wasn't, what programs were being advanced, expanded, diminished, or abandoned, what positions existed that were going away or being expanded again. I haven't been able to do that the last couple of years, either through watching the pub or reading the budget, making phone calls. It's become completely opaque. And so my hope is that in this budget cycle, and I appreciate your comments today, that we really are going to be able to dig down on some of this stuff. And I think it is important for BES to understand that whether this made sense or not, what the intention was, one of the things it's done to your external stakeholders is made it almost impossible for us to track what's going on any longer. It's become really a curtain that's been pulled across something that was once very, very transparent and accessible. So I think that's part of the challenge of understanding it and getting beyond these perceptions or assumptions.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective, Bob. And I think that this is, it's an unfortunate and unintentional outcome. I don't think there's been any secret that the strategic planning effort that drove the transition was a very long and it predates me, but I know that it was a very involved process that brought a lot of internal and I believe external stakeholders into that discussion. I don't think that, and I hate to blame COVID for everything, but we executed the transition weeks before the city shut down. And so for the last 2.5, 3 years, we've been operating in this new regime, but we really have not done a good job socializing, I think, the changes. And I feel that that is something we can absolutely, and you should expect. It's not that we're pulling a curtain down. I think we've moved the furniture and haven't told anybody. And you're walking into the table where there wasn't a table before. And we own that, and we can definitely make sure that we crosswalk what you're interested in and where it lives now. That the intention is never to pull the curtain down. It was to become a much more responsive and adaptive and efficient organization. But if no one knows that these are the specific changes, then that's a problem, and we'll remedy that for sure, Bob.
Okay, much appreciated.
Okay, so that was great. Thanks, everyone. I think where we've landed is this is a great segue into our budget conversation. I think you let me know, but I think it moves us along really well. And how about we sort of check in specifically on this topic in 6 months or so, and towards the end of the spring, the middle of the spring. Let's come back and see if, having gone through the budget process maybe a little differently this year and looking ahead to the budget process for next fiscal year, if we think we are nailing some of these ideas that you all have about interacting earlier and more effectively on some of the Bureau's decisions about what we're calling big projects. Which I don't know, do the Bureaus have any small projects? They all seem like pretty big projects, but maybe we should say multi-year projects. So is everybody okay moving on to our budget conversation? No objections? Okay, thanks Farshad for being here again, and thanks everybody for your questions and suggestions. So, like I said, segue. So we are at a place where we have some, I think, really good ideas about how to engage more effectively with budget work. And we're sort of in the middle of budget work for this fiscal year, maybe not in the middle, at the beginning, but as we just heard, we kind of are in the middle. So I think there's maybe some things that we can try out in January, February, March with our review of this fiscal year proposed budget, and set ourselves up at the end of the spring to engage more effectively in the next fiscal year budget. So it's sort of all budget all the time. And as soon as we wrap up recommendations on one, we'll dive right into the next one. But that's kind of what we're doing all the time anyway. Really, it's just we don't necessarily call it budget, we call it policy input or something like that. But so let me walk through a few ideas here that Eliza very nicely bulleted out on the slide. So let's read through them, and then I'd like to hear your thoughts and your feedback about how you think that this would work. So something that will stay kind of the same, let's say, as we have been operating, is that our budget feedback for fiscal 23-24 proposed budget will still stay at a pretty high level. We're sort of launching from PUB's priorities, PUB's values, and the feedback on policy that we already have given to the bureaus, over the last year of our sort of more focused policy work that some members of this board, but also some members of the previous board had done. So that will pretty much, I don't want to say stay exactly the same, but we'll still really strive to stay at a higher level for our collective recommendations, right? So that's kind of that first bullet point. Having said that, the feedback that I heard from you all over the last few meetings about how you want to be engaged in the budget and provide feedback is that you would like more, not so much, you want the big picture, right? And not just this year's budget, but where does this budget fit in sort of bigger picture topics, the priorities of the bureaus, the fiscal and the economic and the community challenges, and just, regulatory challenges and things that extend over 5, 10, 20 years, right? So we'd like to get from the bureaus sort of preceding the more program offer type, more focused budget presentations. We'd like to start with more of a context setting. So hearing from the bureaus about sort of foundational issues, drivers, what was the context in which this year's proposed budget was formed. So that's the second bullet on the slide there. And then this is a little bit more like logistical, is something that Amy brought up a few meetings ago, was just a recognition that we used to have meetings that were twice as long. Obviously they were in person, which can certainly help with communication and getting messages across and getting your questions out there. But they just, we had more time, right? We had more time to talk. We had more time to ask questions and that sort of thing. So here's a proposal for you, is that we take our first Tuesday meetings in February and March, and extend them not quite as long as they used to go, because they used to be 3-hour meetings, but a little bit longer. So 2.5-hour meetings instead of 1.5-hour meetings. So we basically add on another hour and go like 3:30 to 6, let's say, instead of 3:30 to 5. And it seemed like January was a little, like January 3rd, the first Tuesday in January was kind of too soon to propose that, just because some people might still be on vacation. It's, essentially the day after the holiday, and it just seemed maybe a bit much to try and have a 3-hour, 2.5-hour meeting the first day after coming back from New Year's holiday. So think about that for a second, and thinking that maybe I've been talking with staff about some of the challenges, but also some of the benefits of having at least a hybrid meeting, some in-person time, but recognizing, some folks are still going to be more comfortable participating virtually. And of course, the public always needs to be able to participate virtually in our meetings now. So it seemed like January was probably too soon to try and plan for something like that. And there are technology hurdles with hybrid meetings in the city buildings, particularly the city building where we used to meet on 4th Street. So we need some time to sort of figure out how that could work. But longer meetings, twice a month, or at least once a month, longer meetings, and maybe incorporating a hybrid in one or more of those meetings. So for January, though, I'm proposing that we consider extending our second meeting of the month by just 30 minutes, make it a 2-hour meeting instead of 1.5, just because January is when we need to have our preliminary budget letter completed by the end of January. So we have just, our 1.5-hour meeting the day after the holiday, and then just one more meeting to get that, at least roughed out, right? We could do the 2-person, meet with Amy and do final wording and all of that. But, we all have to be together to talk about at least the basic content that we want in that letter. So think about if that could possibly work to have a 2-hour meeting on our third Thursday meeting in January. Let's see. And then the last 2 bullets are more about sort of what we're asking of the bureaus as they are bringing us budget information, and the more detailed budget information in February and March, mostly February probably. And that is, again, we'll likely still be looking at, or I should say again, be looking at program offer style presentations, rather than, a line by line item, going through the budget. But even so, do you think it would be helpful to, again, have those program offers presented in, again, the context of, where does this fit in, like in Farshad's slide where he had the, the strategic plan and the equity plan up on top. And then, again, we have the capital improvement plans and the 5-year operating plans. Where do these program offers sort of fit in this bigger strategic picture? We'd like some context around that. And I think that pretty much covers it. Oh yeah, sorry, there is one more particular thing in that second to the last bullet. And that is another thing I was hearing from you all is we kind of to Lorraine's second point in the questions a few minutes ago about, we'd like to see where the input that we've already given, how is that reflected in the budget that you're presenting to us for this fiscal year. So we would ask for some of that context as well from the bureaus. We heard this, and this is where it's showing up. A little bit of that, maybe that crosswalking that Bob, you and Farshad were sort of talking about. Where's this showing up in the program offer, or where does this program offer show up in the bigger plans? So feedback, what do you all think about any or all of that as a plan for how we dive in and review the fiscal year 23-24 budget? Yeah, Bob, you came on camera, so yeah, go ahead. And then Bob, and then Teresa.
I think this looks good overall. I guess, I'm kind of a budget junkie. I like the details. I like to dig down on the numbers. I tend to read the budget end to end. I guess I'm weird that way. But I worry a little bit about the first and even potentially the last bullet. I don't disagree with either one of them, but my experience in recent years is it has stayed very high level. So it's very philosophical, and we tend to talk about our values and and it's very easy for everyone to nod and say, oh, we all agree. But where that actually manifests itself is in the line items and what we actually spend money on and what we don't. And so I just want to make sure that there is space in this budget and time in this process to really dig down on that. It does get back to what we were talking about earlier, but I really like to understand the numbers, because ultimately that is where the rubber hits the road, and we can all nod, agree, and say we're on the same page, but it can mean really, really different things in terms of what actually gets funded. So just wanted to flag that. I'll probably be a bit of a pest in terms of wanting to get to the hard numbers.
Teresa, why don't you go ahead next?
I don't have a strong opinion over this first and second bullet, but in regards to ways of participation, I just want to voice my concern with meeting in person and holding a 2.5 hour meeting. I wouldn't oppose to making it a 2 hour long meeting by extending it by 30 minutes, but a 2.5 hour meeting, honestly, by that time, it's like the second half would not be very productive for me, given, these are intense meetings, and it's just, yeah, I just have some concerns over that proposal. For me, it's also something that's not very, I also have concerns over, having to travel all the way to downtown to meet in person for one meeting. So just want to put that out there. Yeah.
Thanks, Teresa. Why don't you go ahead, Julia?
I have to unmute myself first. I just wanted to kind of follow up on what was just said. I do see the value of having a longer meeting. I'm also have a similar hesitancy about in-person because of travel time, because it's not really 2.5 hours once you take all that into account. I feel like if we're going to structure the meeting to be that much longer and have it be productive, there needs to be, a break built into it, or it just needs to be structured in a way that kind of helps ensure that it is a little bit more accommodating of our needs. You know what I mean? In terms of if it's going to be that much longer, structuring the meeting a little bit differently. I'm not quite sure what that looks like, but I do think that it's good that you have or hybrid as an option in here as well. So I get that there's a tension there about having longer meetings, but being able to make sure they're productive. But if we're going to do it, I just want us to be really thoughtful about changing the structure in a way that's more accommodating of people's needs if you're going to be meeting for that much longer.
How about Sarah, Robin, and Tom, and you guys just chime in when the last person finishes.
Yeah, I am curious if we do in person, if we could explore different places other than downtown, because especially, you know, just hearing what Teresa and Julia are saying, you know, if we're in an in-person meeting until 6 o'clock downtown, like that is just not really how I want to spend my time trying to get out of downtown at 6 o'clock. So I mean, I can offer up the Interstate building, the Water Bureau Interstate building, that's near the Rose Quarter, that's on the east side, inner east side. That's where my office is, and that's where Joe's office is as well. And we have meeting spaces there. But I'd be curious if we could find a more central location that has more parking and isn't in the downtown area.
This is Robin. I just wanted to say that I kind of wanted to second what Teresa and Julia had mentioned, that I would, if we extend any meeting, I would definitely want a built-in break just to recognize that it's necessary for those longer meetings. And also kind of caution against doing it 2 months in a row. I see the value in extending some of our meetings. I was thinking maybe quarterly. That's kind of also where I sit at with in-person meetings, because I very much want to be COVID safe, which is why if we ever did in person, I'd likely want a mask mandate, as well as just always the continuation of hybrid accessibility to these meetings. And yeah, I would be okay with extending the second January meeting the extra half hour, but I would likely caution against a 2.5 hour meeting, virtual or in person, a couple months in a row.
I agree with a lot of what everybody's already shared, and I think the thing to me is extending the meetings in January to sort of see how that goes. I'm in favor of that, and then maybe at the last meeting in January, sort of revisit it and ask all of ourselves, okay, do we want to do a 2 hour, 2.5 hour, whatever it might be in February, and sort of see how it goes with what we try in January, and then make that plan, that final plan. And certainly having a place to meet, I think would be great, other than downtown, at least for me, but maybe there are some people that live close to downtown. So anyway, some location that accommodates the most of us. That's it. Well, one last thing, I do think that some of the things, you know, like we have these things. So for instance, this thing about the ramp and talking about that, a lot of times we have these little things that we really sometimes never get to. You know, we're talking about lead and this new thing, the ramp, and some other things. So we're talking about this for the budget process, but and there's a lot of stuff, and there might be more people like Bob who like to dig down into it. And if you don't have time, then what's the purpose of digging down into it if you find something and there's no time to bring it to the board and then address it. So I think more time will be helpful, but I want to be careful of that too as well. Thanks.
I think I'm next. This is Alexis. Thanks for putting this together. I like the outline here, and especially appreciate what has been shared about kind of our direction to the bureaus about the kind of information to bring to us. I think as a new member that is very helpful, especially in coming out of the conversation we just had about the big projects, what the context is and where the budget asks fit in within the broader with those 5-year operating plans. I'm okay. I don't mind extending those, just to echo what others have said, those meetings in Tuesdays in February, in March. I like the idea of a more central location and definitely offering a hybrid option. I'm a little concerned about lengthening the Thursday meeting because it's in the middle of the workday. And as someone who has a full-time job, oops, that's my Roomba. I'm sorry. It can be a little hard for me to step away for 2 hours. And then if we're going to extend the meetings, I just want to second the idea of taking a break and then thinking through some kind of creative ways to facilitate those meetings that are a little bit more interactive, whether that's using like a mural or a Miro board. You want some of those like online whiteboard things, I think might be really helpful. And I don't know what the policies are around even setting up like breakout rooms so that people can advance the work. But I think it might be really helpful to kind of help us use that time really, really productively and thoughtfully. Thank you.
I think it's me now. I'm just curious as to know the why behind us needing to do an in-person meeting. I'm not saying whether I'm open to it or not open to it, but I just want to understand the why behind it, and also the concern about if it's downtown. It's downtown is not somewhere I want to be at nights. Also, so and then also the other thing that I wanted to just reiterate here is the budget process. It seems that there's some realignment that needs to happen if we want to be in sync with the most impactful time. So I also wanted to throw that out there, that I understand that this is probably the process that has been done in the past, but just with the conversation we had with BES, it seems that there needs to be some realignment on how we look at the budgeting process and if we need to realign that.
That's great, Lorraine. Thank you. Great segue. Let me just respond. The in-person meeting is really just because I thought maybe that would help us, communicate better, get to know each other. It's not as stilted as a virtual meeting, but it was not and that was all. So that was the why, and I got a lot of great feedback from you all on content and logistics. So thanks a million. Couple things that I think will to your second, your not question, Lorraine, but your comment that there needs to be some realignment. Let's go ahead to the next slide, because that's exactly what where I wanted to go next. So yes, we do need to realign. And at the same time, we're sort of stuck with the situation we have for this budget, which is, right, last summer is when the bureaus were sort of formulating their priorities, and we sort of missed that boat. So what this proposal is again, that January initial budget letter may not look all that different than it has before. Hearing all your comments about at some point we got to get into the weeds, and I heard that loud and clear. But for our January letter, that will probably still be pretty high level. But then in March, when we're putting together our full budget recommendations, I think we could, in fact, Lorraine, almost use that letter in March, not only to comment on the fiscal 23-24 budget that we've been presented with, right? We'll have some opinions about that. We'll have some areas of support. We'll have areas of concern. But we use that as really our launching point for input for the fiscal 24-25 budget. Because what we're hearing from the bureaus is if you want early input in the next budget and the priorities, we need that in the summer. You know, we don't need that in December. We need it in you know, July, maybe August, right? So I think we could, the proposal is that we sort of use our March letter kind of dual purposes. It's sort of, in a sense, backward looking, like here's what we think about the 23-24 budget, but here are some gaps we see, and here are areas that we don't think are addressed in 23-24 that we would like to see addressed in 24-25. So how does that sound, Lorraine, and others' feedback on that concept?
I think that that is a great opportunity, especially since this process is baked in for this go around, and we could get ahead of the game and then realign in the next go around. So I like that idea.
Karen, I'd like to ask regarding the January introductory thing. I'm thinking that in our previous letters to City Council, we mentioned two things that, as far as I know, they did not respond to our suggestions or recommendations, and that was regarding the automated meters, where we suggested that they look at the scheduling of that, and I think we alluded to saying that maybe delaying it because of all the expense we have with everything else. And then we posed the question about whether it made sense for BES to pay for half of the meters. So I don't think we've ever heard anything back. Maybe we have that I don't know about, but I don't think so. So it might be something where in the January letter, we try to follow up on anything that we've done in the past to bring that back to their attention. And then the other thing is, so for instance, and I don't know exactly how we deal with this at what point, but for instance, the Tryon Creek treatment plant project, I looked it up in the past two budgets that I've worked on since I've been on the board, and there's no mention about the Tryon Creek project at all in terms of this deal that's being made with Lake Oswego. So we're looking at, if this goes through, we're looking at $50 or $60 million a year, if not more. I'm just guesstimating. I don't have any exact numbers, but that would be $50 or $60 million for the treatment plant that we, to this date, have not had something that's been in a budget that we could look at. So I'm kind of concerned, how do we get at issues like that? And maybe Tryon is just a one only type thing, but if there's other stuff, because I'm going back, and this is for some of the new members on the board, the previous director of BES, Michael Jordan, who's now at the budget office, or not budget office, he's in another department. He mentioned that there were some things that were coming in the future, and I think Tryon was one of them. He didn't call them gorillas in the room. He used some kind of term that
Headwinds.
That's okay. Yeah, that there were headwinds coming, and that they didn't really tell us anything specific. And I think Tryon might be one of those headwinds that they either couldn't or wouldn't or didn't. Anyway, they didn't tell us specifically about what they meant in terms of the budget. So there are, I guess I'll call them these headwind wildcards that are hard for us to know what they are. And I think in looking at what Farshad just told us, that's the kind of stuff that would help us with looking at the future budgets for them to bring us in by coming in and maybe in whatever way they could figure it out and giving us more information so that we could look at giving them feedback at the higher level and going deeper if need be. Anyway, so that's the kind of stuff I think it's gonna be there for all of us. And for those of you who haven't seen the budget, I always get a paper copy from Eliza and Amy because it's so big, and I do get into some of the weeds, and there's just a tremendous amount in there, and for us to be able to go through and identify, for instance, there's one project that I thought it was a $6 million project, and I won't get into the details or anything, but it was just, to me, it was like, it just didn't seem right but we were so busy with so many other things. And we do have these only 90-minute meetings that it was impossible for me to bring it to the, or I guess it was possible, but I just felt that I couldn't interrupt everybody's, the flow of everything by me bringing in a project that bothered me and that I wanted to bring to everybody's attention. So I don't know how we.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Tom. I mean, I think that's the challenge, is that that there are going to be issues that each of us as individuals have a particular interest in, passion about, questions about, and we just need to balance, right? And make sure that people feel like they're able to bring their full input and selves to the items that they think are important, without, overweighting, right, one person's interest that maybe isn't someone else's. And
Right.
yes, so point taken. I think some of the Tryon costs that you mentioned, I think they may be there, and we just need, that was what I was getting at with, really asking the bureaus to, kind of show us, right? Show us where these things are showing up, show us where these smaller things fit in the bigger picture. So more guidance on where to look for things in the budget, right? If we're not seeing it. I think we do need to move on, but why don't you go ahead, Christopher, and then we can just before you go, Christopher, I just want to acknowledge the slide that you all saw, which was kind of more essentially the proposal, and then there's more that over the summer, as I was saying, it's sort of all budget all the time, and we use the summer in a slightly different way than perhaps we have in the past, that we're actually still talking about the budget. And that's the time period that will be, think about, there's a lot of things. We'll have new board members in the summer. We'll be orienting them. We'll be putting together our annual report, and we'll be putting together our work plan for the next year. So, in the mix of all that over the summer, we would also be engaging with the bureaus to hear what some of their priorities are for the 24-25 budget, and make sure they hear from us early on at the beginning. Go ahead, Christopher, and then we'll move on to co-chairs.
One question that I did have is with the change in government, is that going to change how we do our work? And also with the conversation of consolidating the bureaus, if that's also going to change how we do things. I think that probably needs to be just, and is management going to bring that to the board to discuss with us?
Just a small thing.
Yes.
Yeah, we can handle that one in 2 or 3 weeks. Well, so yeah, yes, hugely impactful to our work. And Amy, would you like to just say a couple sentences about the point in the coming year where it might make sense for us to start getting into those topics? Yeah.
This is Eliza, and I can chime in with, that's actually good questions. They're big picture, and Commissioner Maps his staff looked at his schedule, and he's available to meet with you all at your Tuesday, February 7th meeting to talk about budget, but also about the changes of governance and what that's going to maybe mean going forward about your work. And to help you all get to the meeting, can we see a quick show of hands of anybody who does not want Commissioner Maps to come on the 7th? So I'm not seeing any hands. So that would be a great first opportunity to talk about that stuff.
Yeah, just recall, folks, that when we decided not to engage in the work session in December, because just a few things going on in December or in November, that we didn't take a formal vote, but we did get pretty strong vibes and interest that folks would like to have more of a working meeting with Commissioner Maps, really in lieu of a work session with full council. So that's what Eliza and did some legwork to figure out when Commissioner Maps might be available, and February 7th looked like a a good time. So that's what that's all about. All right. Thanks for the question, Christopher. And co-chairs. So like I said at the beginning of the meeting, that we need to have on the agenda that goes out a week before the, well, a week before the next meeting, which is actually next week. We need to have the names of people that would be interested in being co-chairs. And that does not, let me just say this, you know, you could change your mind, right? Expressed interest now and you changed your mind next week when we make a decision, that's totally okay. Expressing interest today does not mean committing to being a co-chair, but we would need to have your interest expressed today so that we can get that out there in the public space, and then we could make a decision next week. So December 15th? Yes, December 15th is third Thursday, so that's just next week. So with that, as I know Eliza sent this all information to you in email a couple times, actually, 2 positions. Ideally, there's a co to go with the co-chair. And ideally they would be staggered. So we're looking at if someone would like to express interest to be a co-chair for 1.5 years and someone else for 6 months, then you don't have 2 new co-chairs at the same time again. And again, just PUB, again, this is for next week. We don't make this decision today, but PUB makes the recommendation on co-chairs, and the mayor and commissioner in charge make the appointment of the co-chairs. So with that, again, many thanks to Robin, who has expressed interest in being a co-chair. So that is now public. Thank you, Robin, for expressing interest. Other folks that would be interested and willing to fulfill the job of co-chair for at least 6 months. Tom, is that an interest or is that a question?
It's both. So my term is completed in June of 2023. So I have 6.5 months left. I don't, you know, I'm an old guy, so I'm looking toward other people on the board that I think should do it. But if nobody wants to do it for the 6-month period, then I would volunteer, but I would prefer somebody else to do it. So I really don't want to do it, but I would like to support whoever the other co-chair is and not leave a co-chair being an only chair. So if nobody else wants to do it, then I would like to do it. And that's my statement for the future.
Tom, I think you have to work on your campaign a bit, but thank you for expressing interest. Other folks, how about tentative? I'd be interested except for, or I'd be interested if I could learn a little bit more about XYZ. Let's hear from a few more folks. I'd love to hear why folks are not interested, because we might be able to alleviate some of those concerns. The silence. See, this is the point where if we were in person, everyone would be looking down at their notes and avoiding eye contact. And we don't have to have that uncomfortable awkwardness when we're virtual. But Julia.
I'm in a similar place to Tom, only I'm a hard no until after the legislative session ends. So if Tom is the only person who's interested in being the co-chair, in addition to the one other person who's interested, I'd be willing to alleviate, you know, sometime after June. For me, it's definitely a capacity issue, but I also feel like I would like there to be diversity in the chairship of this board. And I don't feel like I'm bringing that to the table as being a co-chair either. So I would prefer to have that door open, to have better representation, but like I'm a maybe to after June.
Okay.
So again, I guess I got to work on my campaign as well, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that, Julia. Okay, Eliza, I know we need to wrap this up, but remind me, do we just have announcements and plan for
Yeah,
this meeting next?
I think we just have announcements. And
Okay.
and I think you may have a busy meeting next week too, so we could move on. If there's anybody else who is willing or able, please to be considered, so I could put your name on the announcement, even if you change your mind by next Thursday. Please let me know, like by the end of this evening, like via text, email, or chat in the, just let me know to put you on the public meeting notice. Your name, that's all I'll say. So.
Okay, thanks, Eliza. And I will, so I would be willing to continue my co-chairship should that be the will of the board for 6 more months. I do that with some hesitation for actually some of the same reasons that Julia and Tom pointed out, but mostly it's not so much a capacity issue, but I think it's more healthy for the board to have a turnover in the chairpersonship, because the chair does have a lot of sort of say, right, in what gets on the agenda, how the agenda is organized. The chair has the access to, we all have access to staff, but the chair has access to staff and bureau leadership. It's more accessible to the chair than it is to pub members, right? And I don't think that's great to have that be one person for a year and a half. I just don't think that's healthy for the board. Again, I want to give a nod to Robin, who has expressed interest and willingness to be considered for a co-chair. And I do not want to ask Robin to shoulder that on their own. I just don't think that would be fair. So anyway, Eliza, you can put my name on the list to be considered for a 6-month, it's essentially an extension, but a 6-month reappointment. Okay, that's that. So on to, I'm sorry, Lorraine, go ahead.
Never mind, go ahead.
No.
Sorry, I was just reading the thing, and I saw the BS director interviews, and I just wanted to raise my hand to as being wanting to participate in that.
Okay, you're moving us along, and I appreciate that. Thank you. That was exactly where I was going next. As you may have seen in email, the Bureau is going to be moving ahead with recruitment of a director, and the announcement's out, and they are looking for 1 or 2 pub members to be on the interview panel, which I thought was a super exciting development. So thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Julia. Is there anyone else interested in being considered to be on the panel?
I just have a quick question about the timeline for this and and like what all is expected. Is it, being there in person every single day for a week for 4 hours? I don't know, so if you could just clarify or provide some more details on what that entails.
This is Eliza, and I think they're working out the details as we speak. I think the timeline, the position closes in, I believe it's January 16th. I don't know why I remember that date since I'm so bad at dates, but it's mid-January. And then they're planning to move aggressively and they probably will because it's a directorship, but I also know the city in their hiring sometimes doesn't move aggressively. So I think your time commitment is probably a little bit conversation and coordinating before mid-January, but the primary of the work will be the last 2 weeks of January, possibly into February. And so that's what that's the time frame, the time commitment. And I think they really are wanting at most 2 pub members. So you may want to have, like, if there's several people are interested, I think as a board, you need to actually kind of formally decide who you're nominating. And you could nominate 2 people and then like maybe a 3rd person as the alternate, because if you've ever done scheduling with multiple stakeholders, sometimes it's about the schedule, unfortunately. So that could be a way that you go. And I will mute myself now.
Actually, before you unmute, Eliza, or before you mute, if we had, because I'm guessing Bob might have raised his hand because he's interested too. If we have more than 2, could we make our decision about the 2 that we would send to the board at the next week at the December 15th meeting?
Yes, you could add that to take I let the commissioner staff know, because their timeline's aggressive and I know their scheduling is, they're trying to include multiple stakeholders. It's going to be hectic. I said, sure, we can let you know at latest by next Thursday. So we'll decide at one of the December's meetings so we can get everybody's names out on the table. And then you all could think about when you could take a formal vote. And I think having an alternate is a good idea just because of the scheduling stuff. So like you might vote on 2 people and then the 3rd person is an alternate, something like that.
And I'm sorry, Bob, that was inappropriate for me to speak for you, but just based on the timing of when you raised your hand, please go ahead.
No problem. But yeah, I am interested as well. I'm also curious as to whether the job description was ever floated by us as the pub, because it seems like a place where community input might be helpful in terms of, how just seems like a place where community input might be helpful.
Yeah, it was not, unless I happened at a meeting that I missed.
So I'll just flag that. I mean, I haven't been on the pub very long, but it seems like the places where I see a community oversight, a high-level community oversight board having an impact seem to oftentimes get missed. We've been having sort of a series of conversations about this, but there's no more important decision in terms of a direction of a bureau, often cases, than a hiring of a director. And that's a place where boards typically, when you think about traditional boards, the 2 functions are typically budget, fiduciary responsibility, and hiring and firing. Now, I understand that's different in a municipal context, but I think cutting a board like this out of that stage of the process entirely is not actually appropriate. I think we should have had input.
So noted. Thank you.
Thanks.
Can I ask a clarifying question really quick? Alexis, were you asked good questions about the timeline. Were you tentatively putting your name as one of interest as well, or were you just asking clarifying?
I was just asking clarifying. I'm interested, but I don't think I can't commit to that in January. Sorry.
Joe, did you have a comment about the BES director interview stuff?
Yeah, just a quick, I think a follow-up to, I think it was Bob that was speaking, that if we didn't have influence on the job posting itself, then maybe, whoever is going to be participating in these interview processes, maybe have influence on the type of questions that are asked from the pub's perspective. Thanks.
Great point. Okay, I think we've already talked about Commissioner Maps on the 7th, so that sounds good. Looking ahead to our meeting again, remember next Thursday, we are going to, do we have a slide with topics for next meeting, or is that the end, Eliza? Just yeah, perfect. So thank you. So, or Amy, pardon me. Thank you, Amy. So next week, so next week meeting is still just the 1.5 hours that we normally have on Thursdays. And we're going to be hearing about the BES. I think we're going to be asking probably Farshad to come back again, talking about the Portland Watershed Management Plan and sort of bigger picture foundational drivers, again, sort of context for going into the review of the 23-24 budget. So we're going to get started with the BES presentation next week. We'll have our vote on co-chairs, and it looks like we'll make a decision about appointing folks to the, or not really appointing, but recommending, nominating folks to be on the BES interview panel. And what am I forgetting? Anything? I think so. Oh, the ramp. Oh, so Tom, yeah, the ramp. Tom, what would you think about, I mean, I can see feedback on ramp support. I mean, I can almost see that fitting kind of nicely in our January budget letter as a very specific call out. Do you think we could talk about ramp support in January in the context of budget priorities? How would that work for you?
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to put it. I was actually raising my hand to mention again that I'm going to have this conversation with Farshad, and I'd like to report back to the board the results of that conversation pertaining to the Tryon Creek project. So if I could have a couple minutes to do that, I could do it at the beginning when we have our point where we identify, whether contacts with other bureaus. I could do it then.
Yeah, how about, I mean, thinking about timing, because Thursdays are short meeting. What about, Tom, would you send Eliza and Amy, kind of a written report on your conversation with Farshad, and then they can send it out to the board and we can take a look at it before, well, ideally, right, before December 15th. And then that might just shorten the amount of time that we spend on it.
Right. Okay. I will. Yeah, I'll put some notes together and send it to Eliza and Amy. And then, and depending on what it is, it may be very short. Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for all the great feedback on, budget ideas and planning. And I really appreciate your honesty and really frank feedback on all of that. It's really helpful. Okay, see y'all in a week. Enjoy the rest of your week. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next Thursday.